Südpolshow.
We are the reporters of the radio show Südpol. Could you maybe introduce yourself with your work and with your name?
My name is John August. I write a book called Arlo Finch, a series. I also write movies, and so I wrote the movie Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and Big Fish and some other movies as well.
Arlo is such a charming, sympathetic and very normal boy. Scared, very careful, a bit frightened and everything but a typical hero. He isn't tough, brave or keen on adventures. But on the other hand, it is so remarkable that all the creepy things, Cooper, the lost girl Katie and the long woods, are quite normal for him, and also for Uncle Wade. Arlo's perfectly imperfect. Why did you create your hero that way?
Arlo Finch is very much who I was when I was a 10-year-old boy. So I grew up in the mountains of Colorado, and the woods outside my house, they weren't literally magic, but they sort of felt like magic. And so I loved exploring and sort of finding new paths and getting lost in those woods.
Does there exist a real model for Arlo?
Very much was my youth growing up in the mountains of Colorado. So I was in the Boy Scouts, which were a lot like the Rangers of Arlo Finch. And so while we didn't learn to do spells or magic, we did things that sort of felt like magic. So we learned how to build fires, how to camp, how to sort of survive in the woods.
How much Arlo Finch is in John August?
Oh, very much. In fact, the name Arlo Finch comes from my original name. So my family comes from Germany. They grew up in Heidelberg. And my original last name was Meise. Meise is a very small little bird. A finch is a small bird, very much like Meise. And so I took my original last name, Meise, and that became Finch. And Arlo was just a name that went well with it. So there's a lot of Arlo Finch in John August and a lot of John August and Arlo Finch.
Arlo Finch is not alone. Together with Henry Wu and Indra, Arlo Finch withstands all the creatures in the Valley of Fire. Arlo Finch is also a great story about friendship. What does friendship mean for you and for Arlo?
For me, friendship is always about finding those people who help bring out the best parts in yourself. So Arlo is a kid who's very scared, who's very nervous about doing new things. He meets these friends who are much more adventurous, and he's able to sort of fit in with his group, with his patrol, and really learn to be who he needs to be.
The Longwoods, Cooper, the lost girl Katie, and a lot of more mystical things, which make us a bit afraid, that gets us the creeps when we are reading. Do children need a bit of creep or thrill?
I think children always need a little bit of excitement, a little bit of magic, a little bit of mystery there. And so sometimes those mysteries can be a little bit scary, but you try to sort of introduce those things in a small way. So, for example, Cooper the dog, when we first meet him, it's clear that he's some sort of ghost, but he's not malevolent, he's not an evil kind of ghost, he's just a friendly dog. More creatures come over the course of the story, and Arlo's ready for them when they come.
What were you afraid of when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, I was very much afraid of getting lost. I was afraid of getting lost and never being able to find my way back. One of the things I love about Arlo Finch is that he can happily get lost because he's always able to find his way back. One of the mysteries of this series is why he's so good at being able to find his way through the long woods. And I always loved that about the character, is that he's never afraid of being lost because he can somehow always find his way back.
Stories can become a great impact in growing up of kids. What was the story in your childhood that influences you the most?
The story of my childhood that influenced me most was when I was quite young, I did get lost in the woods. And so I was camping with my family, and I was following this path, and I just kept going a little further, and I crossed a creek. And I could always hear my family, but they thought I was lost. And so it became this big family story of the day that John got lost in the woods. But for me, it was always I just was going a little bit further. So that was sort of the initial inspiration for me, for Arlo Finch.
And by the way, this is a little bit of a personal part. I find it very great that you write with Tim Burton together, because he's one of my favorite directors. He's made Sleepy Hollow, which is my absolute favorite movie. I've seen it 9 times in English, 7 times in German. I even can speak with the movie. Also, I've seen Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Johnny Depp is one of my favorite actors. If there's a Johnny Depp movie in the cinemas, I just go straight on. And I think this is terrific, and it's a great honor to work with a man like him. How is it for you to work with Tim Burton?
Tim Burton is a remarkable director, and so I've been lucky to work on him with him on 5 movies. And every time it's about I know what he can bring to the story, and he knows what I can bring to the story. With Tim, I always get so excited when I see him starting to sketch, and paint, because then I know it really is in his head. For me, the first movie I wrote just for Tim was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which was an incredibly personal story for me, because when I was a boy, when I was 8 years old, we had to write to a famous person. And so I wrote a letter to Roald Dahl, and who was my favorite author. He wrote me back. He wrote me a small postcard. And so to this day, I still have that postcard that he wrote me back. So 20 years later, when I was able to write the movie version of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I had all of my memories of how important that book was to me, and Roald Dahl. So he, in many ways, inspired me to become a writer.
This is nice. I have read the BFG.
Oh, of course. The BFG is another great, fantastic Roald Dahl story.
So I heard also that you wrote for Frankenweenie.
Yeah, of course.
I haven't seen the movie, but this what you have said with the drawing thing of Tim Burton. I think I read about him that when he was studying, that his first movies were like this stop motion things.
Yes. Yeah. So Tim has a great background in animation, and so I've been lucky to work on 2 movies that he did with stop motion animation, and it's so different than normal animation, because usually in drawn animation, you can go back, you can change things. With stop motion, you get one chance to shoot a frame, and then it's done forever. So for Corpse Bride and for Frankenweenie, we had to be so careful that we knew exactly what we wanted, because once you click the frame, you're done. So they've been wonderful movies to work on. So I hope we're able to make some more animated movies in the future.
So you wrote also, of course, for the Chocolate Factory. Have you ever met Johnny Depp?
Oh, I did, of course. So I knew Johnny from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and quite early on trying to figure out sort of what his performance was going to be like. When we started making the movie, it wasn't clear whether he was going to use a British accent, an American accent, or what, and he chose the most difficult accent possible, and but was able to make a really great performance out of it.
He really did.
Yeah.
He really did. And what is your favorite Tim Burton movie?
My favorite Tim Burton movie is Big Fish, and so Big Fish was a script that I'd written before I knew Tim, and when Tim signed on to direct it, we really we both understood what it was like to have a father who you didn't quite understand, and so that really became the beginning of our relationship. So Big Fish is probably the least Tim Burton feeling of all his movies, but it's still the favorite one I think we've done together.
What was your favorite book as a child?
My favorite book as a child was probably The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the C.S. Lewis book. What is the name of that in German? Do we know? So the Narnia Books. So the first of the Narnia Books. And so many of the books I loved as a child were books where a kid enters into a magical world. So in the Narnia Books, there's a back of a closet, and you go through the back of the closet and you enter into Narnia. I love those kind of stories. And so for me, Arlo Finch is that same sense of you're in the normal world and then you cross into the long woods. And so for me, the Narnia books were an incredibly important series.
Thank you very much for the interview.
Thank you very much. A pleasure. Thank you very much.